Thank you so much, Jack. So I'm honored to have with me today Jordan Craig, Jill Sheffield, and Kendall Sparks, the aforementioned Kendall Sparks. And I would like them to introduce themselves and kind of choose how they kind of want to prioritize what they do. So we'll start with you, Jordan. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you get into?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Craig. I lead the product content strategy team at Twitter. My pronouns are she, her. And so primarily what I do at Twitter is deal with the words that are inside the app. So the experience that customers and advertisers both kind of interact with those words. Yeah, those are in my domain. So
Excellent. Thank you. And Jill, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Jill Sheffield. I'm with MasterCard, and I'm the VP of Content Strategy and Development. Been with MasterCard about 12 years, primarily in the roles of operation, customer, and technical support. Joined the content and strategy team about a year and a half ago, 2019, and with no background in content, but I'm a fast learner and I'm very passionate about the customer experience and making sure that it's where it needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. And Kendall, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Kendall Sparks, and I am the lead content designer for Click to Pay at MasterCard, which is our digital solution for payments. Jill and I are not on the same team, but do get to spend time together over at MasterCard. But my pronouns are he, him. I am in charge of all the content in the product interface, as well as supporting our communication strategy across all of the marketing and legal assets for the payment product, and work with my other folks at the MasterCard content design and strategy team to work on all of our products together.
Excellent. Thank you all for being here. I kind of want to just start with, as good content strategists, definition of terms, right? So we hear the terms diversity, inclusion a lot. I think many of us now are starting to get the difference, but I'm sure you still get this question. So I'm going to ask you, not for a dictionary definition, but in your work, how do you distinguish between the two, and how do you kind of engage with those two in your work? And Jill, I'd like to start with you.
Sure, thanks, David. And it is important that we understand the difference. And we know diversity is how we're made up. As a global team, MasterCard has, many different offices across the globe. So my team is very diverse. We have locations here in the US in several cities, as well as countries, Ireland, UK, India, Asia, Australia. So by that nature, we are diverse. However, inclusion ensures that all of my team members are able to bring their authentic selves to the workplace, that we have a space and everyone has a seat at the table and a voice, that we can collaborate effectively. We want our team members to be curious and innovative, because MasterCard's a company that's innovative. And then we ask, well, why is that important that we consider these inclusions? Well, in a technical content space, especially, localization is important. So we need to make sure that our content is clear, it's easy to understand and implement across a global community. We want to make sure that our customers know that we know who they are, we know what their challenges are, and that we're here and able to help them meet that and communicate with them effectively and respond. So we have to be aware of local jargon and sayings which do not translate. We have to think about the images that we produce. Are they inclusive? Can everyone understand them? Inclusion removes the barriers and allows the freedom to see things which may be our blind spots and to address them. When our teams are inclusive, our content's inclusive as well. And it allows us to connect to a wider customer base where everyone is provided with the tools they need to succeed and thrive. This is going to translate into customer satisfaction and enhanced experience and increased profitability.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, that if your customer base is diverse, it seems meet and wise that your content team also be diverse. Kendall and Jordan, do you have anything to add there around how you and your roles distinguish between diversity and inclusion?
one of the things that I think MasterCard is very proud of in terms of from an inclusion lens is advocating from the user's perspective on things that are very deeply personal to identity. MasterCard has a true name card that was put forward as a more authentic way for trans people to represent their identities through their credit cards, because often there's a discrepancy between the name that you're able to use on your ID or at your bank for different reasons. And there's a lot of difficult social interactions that we as cis people would not even begin to understand the complexities of. But knowing that to be a pain point, MasterCard invests in time and energy into developing an identity, a chosen identity forward payment product so that people could be more represented. And I think that, to me, that's the inclusion aspect, right? We're trying to make a wider tent so that more people feel like they have a safe place to be their authentic selves, as Jill said.
Yeah, and I like that they're like diversity for MasterCard might just be like, hey, we've got a lot of different people using our product, but the inclusion piece then comes in and it's like we have a lot of people able to use our product, right? And Jordan, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, only one last piece, because I think both of my colleagues have made some pretty good points, is that when we really make space for diversity, we allow people to show up every day as themselves, and then that makes space for other people to show up as themselves. And I think that's super important, right? So if I'm coming in every day as Jordan, that allows my colleagues to come in every day as themselves. So I always appreciate, at least from the diversity perspective, and allowing people to feel as inclusive as necessary, for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like that even something I was talking about in my talk around anonymized resumes, like that's a good stopgap because of the biases we'd have. But ideally, you don't want someone to have to hide their identity to get a job, right? I think that's an excellent point. And folks listening, if you want to start dropping questions into the chat or the Q&A Slack, we have folks who are going to be monitoring that, and we're going to get to attendee questions pretty soon. So another thing I wanted to ask about, we've started to talk a little bit about, is what kind of diversity and inclusion do we need in our content development teams, and why? Because again, these are big terms, many different ways to look at them. What are the specific kinds that you're working with in your work, and why do you think they're valuable? And this time I'd like to start with Jordan.
Cool. I love this question. And I always like to start kind of with like a statistic whenever thinking through these, right? So like, according to a study done by McKinsey, companies with diverse workforces outperform their competitors, and then racially and culturally diverse companies also outperform industry norms by 35%, right? So this tells me that we need as many perspectives as we can possibly get, from location to gender, life experience. All these things add up to making well-rounded content teams. And without them, we accidentally end up alienating groups, even if it's unintentional. So in my opinion, we just don't know what we don't know. So I can only speak from my own personal intersectionalities of being, one, a Black person, and two, a woman, but like, I'm an able-bodied person, right? So that means that I need to do the work when it comes to accessibility. So if we all take a moment to just step outside of ourselves and think about the content that our teams are producing, we'd be so much better off. So long and short of it is, we need all the perspectives to make sure that our teams are well-rounded.
Yeah, and that's definitely, again, with such a wide user base, that makes perfect sense. Jill, do you have any additional thoughts about that?
Yes, David, what I've found out is that inclusion includes so much more than I thought. We all think about race, and we think about gender, and we think about religious beliefs, but it's even about our personalities. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? And ensuring that people have a space where they feel comfortable being, like we talk about, authentic, but we ensure that their voices are heard and that they're part of the conversation. We have family makeups that run the gamut: single parents, two parents, no children, and marital status comes into play. All of these things are going to make it more powerful, and it help make a better product if we include people from all these different intersections and decide and figure out what makes us alike and what makes us different, and find the beauty in that.
Yeah, and I really like that idea of like, we don't know what we don't know, and how many kinds of inclusion. The blanking on the name of it, Project Inkwot was very famous, and it is a famous inclusive design effort. And in their first go around, they realized that they missed a very big sort of inclusive spot, and that was incarcerated, or formerly incarcerated. And that might seem like a fringe case, but that's 2 million Americans, right? So there's so many things that you don't even realize are dimensions of identity until you actually do the work. So thank you for pointing that out. Kendall, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that especially in the payments industry, there is a tendency to have people around us working on these things who have a certain amount of socioeconomic agency that might blind us to some of the experiences of a large majority of our individual users who might be in a much more budget-minded day-to-day living. And so I think that there's at the forefront of my mind is bringing in the economic diversity of people who have had different life experiences, especially not just in a research-based way, to make sure we're not just asking people of all socioeconomic status what they think, but making sure that they're actually involved in the design process as members of our team, so that they can share their lived experience and help us call out our own biases and blind spots.
Yeah, and the door you're kind of knocking on there is participatory design, which I think is an interesting aspect of all of this, is this idea of, I don't just want to make sure I've talked to the people who aren't like me. I want to give them some degree of agency in what I'm producing. And I think that's a really, really powerful point. I also want to get into, a few of you have talked about your efforts, but I want to dig a little deeper on this. Like, what have you been doing to try to cultivate this kind of diversity and inclusion in your teams? And also kind of what challenges do you face trying to act on this? So Kendall, I want to start with you on this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the core of all of this, we all know how much our team building is about relationships, right? Like we know how much easier it is to get a job at a company where you have somebody who can put your resume on the right desk. We know that those are ways that we're missing different talent pools that are not part of our social circles. So MasterCard, from a larger macro level, has done some intensive work recently to hire external partners to poke holes in our recruitment process from a referral standpoint, because when you're only drawing on your own network of people with shared similar experiences, there's a lot of tendency to bring in people who have, whether they look like you or not, might have had similar experiences to you. So having an external set of eyes to really critique that and not leave it up to our own devices to say, yeah, sure, we're doing a great job, but say, let's really poke some holes in our process. But also from a relationship point of view, MasterCard's content team has a UX Writers meetup in New York City, where we have a very large gathering of folks to come and share and network and create a shared space for knowledge. And me as a manager, I'm looking at that meetup for people with experiences that are different than those of my team members. And I'm reaching out and asking people, where are you in your process? Did you just come out of a boot camp? What kind of portfolio projects are you working on? If you ever need another set of eyes on something, and just offering mentorship opportunities out in terms of just building relationships and connections, and then following up on them, and not just when you have a role open, but asking people how is it going and what kind of work are you interested in doing next. So I think that proactively taking steps to build those relationships is really important. But I also think that institutionally, MasterCard, in response to the awakening that our country has experienced to things this year that have been going on for centuries, MasterCard took a really long step back and said, we want to put forward a whole plan around recruitment. And they've built new relationships with HBCUs for our recruiting pipeline. They're working directly with Spelman, Morehouse, and Clark Atlanta, and they're building new relationships with the CUNY system in New York for our tech hub, where they're also dedicating an analytics team directly to their demographic makeup from a diversity and pay equality perspective, so that we're actually setting benchmarks for ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to making quantitative change to the makeups of our team. So I think that that's a very small sliver of a much larger plan to open up recruitment. And I don't want to speak for that team because I didn't design that plan. But I think that it's about taking a holistic approach that's investing in relationships first.
Yeah, and I really like what you had to say about HBCUs for one, because there's a whole body of knowledge there that people often overlook. But I especially like what you said about building relationships even when there isn't a job opening. And I think this is something a lot of people overlook. But it is, any good recruiter will tell you, you don't just network when you have a job open. You were always building these relationships. So when the job opening is there, you don't have to scramble and say, oh, who do I talk to? It's like, and I love applying that in a more inclusive way. Jill, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Sure, and Kendall and I are lucky that we work for MasterCard that really has a plan to address diversity and inclusion issues. We constantly get education and unconscious bias, and really examining ourselves to see where we may have misconnections, and they really fight to build those connections. We have lots of BRGs within our organization, from our ADAPT BRG that is about people who have disabilities, cultural BRGs like the East Latin Lead, which is our African American BRG. We have what we call ePros, the experienced and engaged professionals, and the young professionals, as well as Salute and Women's Leadership Network. And it's all about building those connections with these people, listening to their stories, understanding their backgrounds and the values that they bring to the organization. And one of the things that I really love about MasterCard, which keeps me a loyal employee, is the fact that MasterCard really believes in doing well by doing good. So they foster volunteerism. And that is another way that we can connect with our customers in a way that we don't normally or would not normally have, and have those conversations with people whose backgrounds differ from the ones that we have. And they continue that. They show that they're invested by investing in these programs and the training for the programs. I myself have been very fortunate to have assignments internationally that helps me to connect with people that have a very different background from my own, and to meet people in their different cultures and examine the things that they have to live with day to day. So all of these things are important to build those relationships and to ensure that we're having the conversations that we need to.
No, that's excellent. And Jordan, any final words on this topic?
Yeah, the only final topic that I think my colleagues Kendall and Jill have done a great job of covering is making sure that in the recruitment process, your algorithms that are set in place aren't acting as accidental gatekeepers, right? So one thing that I see often is that when you're not necessarily, especially in the content field, if you're not necessarily using the correct words, right? Like if you have digital strategist versus content strategist, you may accidentally get refrained from making it into the next round. So I always try when I'm doing any type of mentoring or any type of, running through folks' resumes, et cetera, making sure that they have those specific keywords, but also internally making sure that those keywords aren't accidentally restricting folks from making it into the pipeline.
Yeah, I have this difficulty myself when hiring content strategists. I try to avoid terms like content model or even content audit, because sometimes people have done those things, but they didn't know that was what it was called. So I have to really use plain language to as my algorithm. So we have about 20 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to some of the audience questions. I know folks are scanning the chat and the speaker Q&A. Has anyone like called some of their favorite questions up yet to tell me, or?
So, David, Jill used the term BRG. Could you explain a little bit about what that means?
That's a really good one, Jack. And I did a no-no, which is use acronyms. BRGs are business resource groups. So another part of inclusion is ensuring that everyone understands the words that you're using. So our BRGs are business resource groups that are designed to bring people together to have those conversations.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
It can also be known as ERG, so employee resource groups too.
That's the one I've heard, yeah.
We have a comment from an attendee saying another overlooked group that is becoming more prevalent due to COVID are the financially challenged. Low income backgrounds, bad credit, financial catastrophe, medical disasters, etc. Here's a question. Go ahead.
So that's very interesting, Jack. And I don't know who had that question. I know at MasterCard, we had an opportunity, what we call customer proximity, where we could watch one of our potential customers use a product that we have on the market. And it is designed to address people with different economic backgrounds to help them with budgeting and help them manage their funds. So another way to reach out to people that may have come from a different background or may not, but just to understand what their needs are and how they would use our products and how we could design it to be better for them.
Yeah, I don't know what your experience on the panel is, but I feel like economic diversity is actually one of the hardest for us to wrap our heads around, because even if we're friends with or 2 degrees separated from people with very different, ethnic or political or any other it's very rare that we have people in our immediate circles who are significantly different than us in terms of how much money they make.
Good. Here's another question from the audience. How can you bridge the desire to be inclusive in terms of personality with the desire to hire those who fit the department culture?
I would love to jump in on this. Because I actually at a previous company had a very interesting experience play out where a challenging candidate came in that everybody was really not interested in hiring, but had all the right qualities for the job, but came in with that personality that just wasn't jiving. And we had to have some intense conversations as a team. This was prior to my hiring, so I heard about this after the fact, but we had to have some conversations as a team about whether we were willing to allow that person to come in and challenge us to do better. Because the thing about having a culture and a fit means that we have some shared notions of how we view the world, right? If we're talking about a company culture, we're also talking about a culture of bias that we might all have because of our shared experience or our shared outlook on the world. And so the very things that make content people good at their jobs in terms of negotiating with stakeholders and teasing out the information that they need also make us good at conflict resolution, and they also make us good at having helpful discussions from disparate points of view. So I think that being open to being challenged by somebody who wouldn't be your go-to person to hire is actually probably something that is going to reap rewards from that increase of perspective in ways that you didn't really know. And ultimately, it goes to how serious are you about people development at your company as well, right? What do you do to help that person acclimate and be culturally able to navigate your workplace that might be different for them, but also help the people that are being challenged receive that challenge with an open heart and mind. The people development really matters too.
Yeah, I want to just back that up too, is that it's the difference between culture fit and culture growth, because a lot of times when you bring people who are diverse into a company, they wash out because they're being asked to assimilate rather than being asked to help change the culture. So when you're hiring, ask yourself, not how is this person going to assimilate into what we do? Ask yourself, how is this person going to change us and make us different and better than we were before?
Good. Now, here's a thought-provoking question, but that's why we're here. Where does one draw the line when encouraging people to bring their authentic selves to work? For example, what if their authentic self is racist? I don't want to work with a person who brings their authentic self to work. Sounds like an absurd question, but seriously, who wants to tackle that?
I don't know
Jill?
if I want to tackle it, Jack, but I mean, I want to be truthful and open here. The fact of the matter is there are people who are racist in our organizations. They may not tell you it, they may not be open, but they're there. I think, again, it's very difficult and you may not like it, but they're there. The point is to foster that conversation. If someone's going to be harmful to me physically, that's where I draw the line. But people who have different points of view, they're valid because those are people who exist in our world today. And the fact of the matter is, if you're trying not to hire them, I doubt if you'd be very successful. That's just part of our culture.
True. I can add to that if you don't mind, in that I had to write the LavaCon Code of Conduct. And part of what I was wrestling with is at the time we were talking about dress. You respect the religious garbs of others. And at one point, I started writing in, don't wear anything too overly sexual in garb. And then somebody challenged me going, who are you to decide how sexual I am? And they were right. So it basically came down to, we're here professionally. Don't do anything that will purposely make somebody else uncomfortable. And if you see that, report it so we can talk to them, because we're all in this together. We all have our views. Don't even get me started on politics. So I think the watchword here is respect. Respect the thoughts of others and have them respect the thoughts of you. if you can't say a good word, don't say anything at all. It comes to mind. But I guess that's what I try to prove. I try to create a respectful environment. Let's go on to another question.
Oh,
How
Jack,
do you address? Oh yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
I just wanted to say that that's when netiquette really comes into play, especially since we're all kind of in distributed workforces at this point. Those working norms and those rules around how you want to collaborate really come into play, right? Because if someone does have an opposing view from yours, as long as it's being handled in a respectful manner, there's not much you can do. But when they do start to cross those like etiquette rules of being on the internet, that's when like the issue really comes up.
Absolutely agree. And someone asked a kind of a tangential question: how can you tell if you made someone else feel uncomfortable? And a part of this is observation. If you say something and they go, you know, or they start using body language, very crossed off and closed body language, it's part of our responsibility to be aware of how we present ourselves to others. I know in the past that I grew up in the South where everyone called each other babe and sugar and darling. And I eventually learned that that's okay when I'm in Valdosta, Georgia, but it's not okay in New York City. So it's situational awareness maybe and cultural awareness.
Kendall, you sounded like you had something to say.
Well, when we were talking about authentic relationships, and I think that what you're bringing up, Jack, actually feeds into this really nicely. I think that people being authentically able to say, I'm not sure if I just offended somebody. I'm not sure if I used the wrong word when I said, I'm not sure if that's actually something that has been very top of mind for me. I'm part of the Diversity by Design team at MasterCard, and I feel very like, called by my intersectionality of being queer and white and cis to try to help other people who might have other pieces of my intersectionality show that it's okay to ask questions, and also okay to not do it perfectly, but to take responsibility for educating oneself. So I actually think that sometimes the difficult conversations where people do reveal authentically what they're thinking and feeling can be part of how we sort of stitch ourselves and our identities back together as a nation and as a people, is to be able to say, you know what, that is sticky for me. And let me explain to you why what you said was hard for me. And as an example, I work on a team that is all women. We're led by a woman design director. I'm the only male-bodied person on the team. And for some reason in meetings, sometimes others of our partners in different parts of the organization will refer to it as Kendall's team. It's not. They'll refer to somebody else's work as something that Kendall did. And I have a responsibility in those moments to right the wrong of that bias, right? And there are different ways to do that, and it's difficult. But that person's authentically not clocking their own bias in that situation, and they're authentically making that mistake. So I have to authentically assume that it's not out of malintent, but try to help have a conversation of awareness happen and show that it's okay to fail and it's okay to get better too.
Yeah, and kind of what you're talking about there is good faith, right? And I think that's where you draw the line with racism. True racism is not out of good faith at all. It is coming from a place of hate. It's coming from a place of like, I fundamentally do not believe in your humanity. And there I'm willing to say, sorry, if that's your authentic self, we can't, that doesn't align with our values, right? Because you can have values that are solid and core, no matter who you hire. And they're there to grow your culture and find new ways to express those values. But the core values, which hopefully involve respect for human life, right? Those don't change. So if we're talking about your authentic self opposes our actual values, okay, then I feel it's appropriate to draw a line. But if it's more like, hey, I do value other human life, but I just don't know how to express it. I just don't know how to talk about queer bodies and what's the difference between androgyny and like, I just don't know. Great, let's talk about that.
David, something you said earlier in your initial presentation, where you ask yourself, what if I was wrong about that? How often do we ask ourselves, am I wrong? Am I approaching this wrong? Somebody in the chat window suggested that is find your tribe the right wording to use for a conference? And I went, I've never thought of that. Is there implications there I wasn't aware of? So I go, maybe I was wrong. And I'll give you a classic example of this, that Andrea Ames runs a design thinking workshop, and she did it at LavaCon a couple of years ago, as a post-conference workshop, and gave the attendees the question, how can we improve the LavaCon attendee experience? And they came up with things that I would have never thought of. Someone pointed out that every single thing I did at the conference was for extroverts. We did speed networking, we did zip lines, we did karaoke. And two guesses what the introverts wanted at the conference: a quiet room with puppies. I so traumatized the introverts that they needed therapy dogs to recover. So guess what? Every year since, we've had a quiet room with therapy dogs.
Zach, I'm not an introvert, and I love the dog.
So after lunch, we have a lounge called Kittens and Puppies that has live streams of kittens and puppies if you need to be quiet and recharge your batteries. So being in a culture where you ask your employees, ask different business units, what are you experiencing? Because there may be stuff going on that you don't know about.
I'm going to interrupt for just one moment because we have a really important question from a first-time LavaCon attendee. It's from Hasna, and her question is, what can someone do to mesh well in a work culture if they enter into a work environment where they feel like they're the only person of a certain background?
I'm happy to answer. One of the stories that I always tell is when I first started working at Twitter, when I met with my boss, Dantley Davis, he's the chief design officer at Twitter. He told me immediately, like when we were first kind of getting to know each other, that I kept code switching, that I was, using a different layer of my personality to kind of match his, and that he really wanted me to just like show up as who I was, and that would make him feel more comfortable. And so that's really stuck with me in the last year of showing up as who I am. And so I think it's important to figure out the ways that you can show up authentically as you and feel comfortable doing so, while also letting other people into perhaps another layer of who you are, right? Maybe the people that you're working with want to know more about the cultural background. And by depriving them of those experiences, you'll never actually get to know that answer. I think it's a different question, however, if you're feeling the need to, specifically come in and adhere to the cultural norms that are there. I think that's a different problem in itself entirely.
Good question. Good answer.
Sorry, I just want to knock on that door a little more. I think one thing we haven't talked a lot about in this panel is power. And when you are an employee, especially a new employee, you are not in a place of a lot of power. And in my opinion, it should not be on you to feel comfortable. It's like if I go to a hotel, like I shouldn't have to ask them to make me feel comfortable. It's their job to make me feel comfortable. And there's great value in them making me feel comfortable. And so I guess what I'm saying is like, I would ask, like, what is that company doing to make you more comfortable? If they aren't doing it, well, that's when we have to start talking about that power dynamic. And hopefully if they're doing their job, there is an outlet, there is a resource, there's someone for you to go to and say, hey, this isn't working the way it should, but in a way that's safe for you. Because again, power. So I want to say, like, to anybody there who it is on the company, in my opinion, it is on the people with more power to make the people with less power feel more comfortable and welcome and safe.
Cool. We're looping in Jessica Reed from NBC Universal into the conversation because she had a question in the chat room that she felt she could answer. Jessica.
Oh, I just wanted to concur with what everyone is saying. First of all, I just cannot express enough how excited I am to see diversity and inclusion as a track here. I think acknowledging that it's something that people have become increasingly aware of over the last 6 months is great, but it's not new. And so I feel really excited to see it. But I echo everything that everyone has said in terms of, like, it's not about you finding a way to mesh, right? It's about finding a place where you're comfortable and echoing just what everyone had said. Like, if you're in a place where you feel like you're not supported and you're being put in an uncomfortable position, that's just unacceptable. And I'm lucky enough, much as I'm sure my MasterCard cohorts here are, to work for a giant corporation that has the financial backing for diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way that smaller tech startups don't necessarily. And sometimes, unfortunately, you have to be the change you want to see. And that can be super uncomfortable. Like my background before NBCU was startups. I came out when I was 17. I've never gone back in the closet. I've been very out and proud, but I also am white, right? Like I have incredible privilege and power in the room. And I try to use that voice to help bring other voices to the forefront. And I think finding those other people around you who can help lift you up is also a huge sort of momentum that can help build a new culture.
Excellent.
So well said, Jessica. And if I can just add on there, like a little call to action for those of us who might show up to a workplace and look a lot more like people around us and see that there might be one person who has, for whatever part of their identity, might feel a little left out. I think we have a responsibility to show up in allyship, not just with posters and signs and buttons, but in daily relationship. And know that when something with the Black Lives Matter happens in the news, which is practically all the time, that your Black colleagues are probably experiencing a different day than you might be as a white person. And make sure that you approach knowing that it's their opportunity to speak for themselves and not needing to, report into you as your one Black friend or whatever. Excuse me if I'm being flippant, but I also know how much pressure it is on people who are the one representative of their identity to represent their identity in a way that I think that those of us who are trying to understand need to still be sensitive to when we're asking our questions. So show up as somebody who is there to check in with somebody. How are you doing today? Tell me about what's going on in your life. What do you need? Can I be supportive? Those questions to any new person approaching an environment are going to help them acclimate. But specifically, if you see that they might be blazing a trail by their very existence in your circle in that moment.
Agreed. And one of our attendees, Greg Herdigan, if I pronounced that correctly, says, it's like if you had a party at your house and there was one person hanging in the corner, you're looking uncomfortable, you'd at least check in and see how they're doing. And if they needed anything, maybe attempt to engage them in some conversation. Workplaces need to have more of that mentality about employees.
So
so we have time for one more question. Felice, was there a question that you saw that we want to bring up?
Yeah, there was a question that came in early on, and it was about, and it's good that Jill had sort of just brought it up here. And it's this concept of the financial profitability. Is there a way to move past having to prove that diversity is financially profitable while arguing for D&I in the workplace? A loaded question.
I'm not actually a part of this panel, so
I'm
totally happy to answer that question. I think the honest answer is no. Like, I wish I could, from my perspective, the honest answer is no. Like, I think ultimately we would love to not have to make any sort of financial reason why we do things, but, we work for businesses. And do I think it should be the only reason? Of course not. Like, it should be just humanity and empathy and wanting to create culture that people want to work in. But I also think we are in the business of making money, whatever those businesses are, and it's going to be very hard to do that. It's going to be very hard to change culture if there isn't some financial implication. It's uncomfortable, but that's my experience anyway.
And I just want to yes and what Jessica just said, that I agree. But the caveat I want to throw into that is, like you said, that can't be the only argument, because you will run into a situation where it's actually in your financial interest to not be diverse. You're always going to have a situation where it's in your financial interest not to do the right thing. Times will change and you'll get to a point where that can't be the argument. So ultimately, and this is, the long game, to be sure, we need to get to a point where we're not holding business over here and values over here, right? And maybe that means like founding our companies from the start with that, and having different financial instruments to make that be an easier thing to do. But I think we have to always look at I'm going to convince you using numbers as the short game, and the long game as I don't want you to think of business as over here and ethics is over here.
Agreed. So at this point, we are ending the panel discussion.